Well, welcome back to the Build Different podcast. Adam, great to see you again virtually this time. I'm excited to bring in a couple guests that we have on today. Don't know where in the world Adam is at, but where are you based, camped out at now, Adam?
Sitting in beautiful, nice, cool South Lake Tahoe. So happy to be where I'm sitting and not where everyone else on this podcast is sitting.
Well, we were just joking before we recorded of how hot it has been, and Adam is no longer able to talk about weather because it is way too nice where he is at. So we have a really fun conversation slated today. I hope you guys have been encouraged by just the episodes we've been putting together this season, much more field focused, and we got a couple new friends coming on with us from a familiar face with Skender, who we've had on a couple seasons ago, but two new folks, which I'm really excited to introduce you to as we kind of get things moving. So I'm going to bring on both Tom and Clay. Great to have you guys. Thanks for joining in with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We have gone through back and forth scheduling and getting this scheduled. And one, I just appreciate you two showing up. This is it's fun. Adam and I have learned we try to do these in person, which makes for the technical sides to be on our end. But in this case, we help share that load with you guys. So appreciate you guys making your way through the technical sides of doing these virtually.
I was very clear that I was willing to come to you, and Adam, now I'm a little disappointed that invitation didn't come through.
That's true. I'd be happy to host you in a future episode out here in South.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know that I'm ever asking Adam where he's at anymore, because I can guarantee it's much cooler than it is Texas, and for sure in the Chicago land this time of year. But yeah, just appreciate you guys making your way on here. We have always just been encouraged by what the Skender team is doing. We got to meet an individual a couple seasons ago, Mr. Ben Stocker, who's always just a big fan of a lot of the things that we're doing on this team. But he is, like any good friend, introduced us to more of his colleagues and folks on his team. So yeah, I just would love a little background. Maybe Tom, I'll kick it to you first to kind of just talk about what you do on the Skender team, and then I'll move over to you, Clay.
Yeah, so my name is Tom Behringer. I'm a senior superintendent. I've been with Skender for, it'll be 14 years actually in August. Before that, I was with another general contractor for roughly 5 years. I went to school for civil engineering at U of I. My dad was in the trades, and I remember growing up that he would constantly tell me that engineers and architects didn't know what they were doing. So I thought it was probably a good idea to get some real world experience. So when I graduated, I decided to go out in the field, be a superintendent. And roughly 6 months in, I looked around and I'm like, you know what? I think this is for me. I'm going to stick this out. So here I am almost 20 years later.
I have never been surprised. I should say I'm not as surprised anymore of how many times architects in the path that folks got into construction has either started or in some way intersected with I thought I was going to be an architect or in some sort of same vein. So great intro. Appreciate that talk. Clay, would love to know a little bit more about you and your role in the team.
Yeah, I came up through the PM ranks, so a little different story, but right now I head up a number of our internal businesses here at the company, our self-perform, and because of that, our technology rolls up under my umbrella. I've been doing it for about 23 years. I've been at Skender 18, so longer than this guy. I ran our commercial interiors group, but I was always a self-proclaimed tech enthusiast. So I think that's why you see me sitting here today. I was able to help steer Ben into a position where you guys got to meet him and he thrives. And so I've kind of by default in charge of pushing the growth on the tech side with Ben and with guys like Tom and the rest of the team here. So,
man, that's awesome. We have enjoyed anyone who Ben gets to introduce us to, and it's just fun to hear your guys' kind of side of the story too. If you haven't been around with us or haven't listened in, go back and check out season 2. I don't know what exact episode it was, but yeah, Ben was on kind of giving a little recap of his story, kind of how he got into his role. And it's fun to now kind of get your guys' story too, and where your paths intersect with Ben and kind of what it is that you guys do on the team. But I'm curious, for a lot of folks that maybe haven't heard of Skender or know kind of the work that you guys do, maybe Tom, I'll kind of kick it to you. What type of work do you guys do? Where are you located at? Just kind of a brief overview of Skender.
Yeah, so we're based out of Chicago. We actually was a few years ago opened an office in Indianapolis. So we focus on healthcare, interiors, multifamily, and then as of the last few years, commercial. We've started going after some high-rise work here in the city. I mean, Clay could probably definitely give a little bit more of the history since he has been here a little bit longer. But yeah, we've primarily been in Chicago and just started out in Indianapolis as well.
Oh, you pretty much got it. Mid-sized general contractor here in the Midwest. Trying to broaden out the different types of work we do, but we've got a pretty broad base with what you mentioned now, and still opportunities to grow in all those areas. So it's been a fun ride, that's for sure.
That's awesome. And you guys have been in the Chicago area the whole time at Skender?
Yeah, I have. Tom's moved around for us.
Yeah, I actually, when I got hired on for Skender, it was to relieve a project manager and a superintendent team out in Ontario, California. So I literally got hired on. Lisa, our head of HR, slid a plane ticket across the table and said, "We'll see you around Christmas time." So I spent roughly 7 years kind of going back and forth between the West Coast and Chicago.
You don't have the kind of Canadian accent yet, or I guess I should say up in that area. So I guess you weren't there long enough.
Ontario, California.
California. See, we'll edit that part out to make it sound even better on this bad hosting skills over here, Adam.
It's another reoccurring theme though, superintendent travel.
Yeah, there it is.
Talked about quite a bit in past episodes also.
Yeah, well, here I'm thinking Canada. So there we go. Adam, I don't spend enough time with you out on the West Coast yet, but
we'll work on your geography after this.
There it is.
I'm curious, just on your personal resume, just any notable projects. What are you most proud of over the last 14 plus years?
Wow. So I think while I was out on the West Coast, I did primarily car dealerships for Fletcher Jones. And I would have to say that Ontario job, and then there was another project we did in Fremont, California. Those were definitely challenging projects, but at the end of the day, walked away very proud of those. And then back in Chicago, about 2 years ago, I did a project for a senior living facility, and it was basically having to put a new sprinkler system in an occupied building. And all of these folks were retired and rather wealthy. And the last thing you want to see when you're heading into your twilight years is this guy coming in and ripping up your condo. So logistically, that was definitely my most proud moment.
Awesome. Occupied buildings are always fun, especially when you have wealthy seniors.
Man, I can't imagine the dynamic of that in itself. So getting a knock on the door from Tom and saying, hey, would love to help you guys out. Well, 15 plus years from the two of y'all is enough time to have a pretty dynamic relationship with technology, which is kind of what we're focusing on this season. What's interesting is really the guest that we're trying to bring on in this season specifically is one, I think a little bit from your end, Tom, from the field, and obviously Clay, your background from Ben, who was on with us before, but also just kind of from your perspective, the kind of longevity of you've seen a lot of tech come and go, and you probably had your hands on things, saw things work, saw things that did not work. And I guess the kind of first question I want to pose to you, and maybe start with you, Tom, is like, what has been your relationship with technology just in your career? Are you encouraged by it, discouraged? Do you feel like it's a helpful, more like, just answer that maybe however you'd want. But yeah, you've been around long enough to see a lot of different tech in the career that you've had.
For sure. Yeah, tech and I definitely have a very positive relationship. I grew up in a very small town in Western Illinois, and there weren't a lot of things to do on weekends and weeknights. So if you weren't playing sports, I was usually at the computer trying to teach myself how to make web pages and do all that kind of fun stuff. So I've always been kind of drawn to that. But definitely in the field role, I've always found it to be a very positive thing. I think at the crux of what we do is communicating, right? So it's communicating with a subcontractor, it's communicating with an architect, it's communicating with an owner, and anything you can use to help assist with that and to help make your point more clear is obviously going to be a benefit. And I think that a lot of the technology that, especially currently with Drone Deploy, Procore, and some of the other things that we've been using, it really helps assist in that communication. And in doing that, you can set that expectation, and there's a lot fewer misunderstandings and a lot fewer drawn out conversations, when you can be very cut and dry. And I think technology as a whole really assists in making that happen.
Yeah. Clay, curious to hear your thoughts to that. Maybe a shared opinion or a differing one, but yeah, what's kind of been your relationship with tech?
I go way back, so I've always been a huge fan, but I was super thrilled to have email when I started. At Purdue, it was having to log into a terminal and know how to like call up email, and so like once I had a laptop with email that I could at least get to when I'm at the office, that was like game changing for me. So I've seen it the full gamut, at least from a more recent time frame, if you will.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I've always loved it. Like, always wanted the next big thing. I had a belt clip and a Nokia after the pager, and then wanted a Razor and a Palm Pilot. And then
I recently saw a post that said that Palm was worth more than like NVIDIA, Apple, I think Google, like, and this was obviously back when Palm was a thing, and let's all date ourselves significantly here, knowing what that is. But it is crazy that it's interesting to hear both of your kind of like thoughts around tech being like the communication enhancer, which I think is a very fair way of like addressing that. Did you imagine that would be kind of what its, I guess, greatest value it would bring to be, or has that like come over time? A lot of people maybe argue too, like it's almost made communication worse because there's so many tools and different things out there too. Like, I guess, Tom, like, did you anticipate technology being kind of the enhancement for communication, or has that like slowly kind of trickled over time that you've kind of seen that?
I think, starting out, and again, I had a desktop computer, and being a superintendent, that was always difficult when I first started. But having the email, I always saw the capability of it. I always saw that if it was taken, this next step, that it could become that. So I was always looking for that next piece that would help fill that void. But I will say, to your point about it almost is hindering communication at this point, I do agree with that. I think there comes a point where you can rely on technology only so far, and then you just kind of have to do your job. And I think right now everyone looks for that magic program or that magic app that's gonna handle everything for you. But at the end of the day, like, you still have to pick up a phone, you still have to interface with people, you still need to do what we're hired to do.
Yeah, the relationships there tend to trump the tools most of the time, right? I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm curious too. I mean, lots to unpack even there. I mean, would you say that almost right now, like, tech has almost become so overwhelmingly like there's just so much of it that like folks that you've kind of seen coming into the field role like rely on it too much? Or are you kind of sensing that like once they get into maybe the industry that like, oh, they now need that as a tool? Like, talk a little bit about what you kind of see as like the next generation or wave like comes through from a superintendent level.
I think, and I really noticed this when we went to the ground break this last year, that, there's so much out there. And especially and maybe I'm just getting old and crotchety, but there's so much out there, and I feel that we don't know how to fully use what is in front of us right now. So, we look at all these new apps, these new programs, and how everything interacts, and how, you do this, and like Drone Deploy now instructions there, right? So you have both the inside and the outside, which is great. But in a lot of other capacities, it might not be the best thing. And we should just learn how to fully use and take advantage of the programs that we have at our fingertips before we start looking for that next. I think everyone's so quick to just go to the next, find the new hot thing when we don't fully know and utilize what we have already at our disposal.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that over many seasons of like starting with the problem statements, identifying like what the pain points really are. I mean, I think honestly, kudos to Ben. I mean, he was a big proponent of explaining kind of your guys' process to evaluate tools. And Clay, maybe I'll kind of ask you, like, how do you sift through and like identify what tools that you need versus like what tools that you have, and are you utilizing them the most? Like, what does a little bit of that process look like, at least from kind of your level at kind of overseeing a lot of the tech?
I mean, self-admittedly, I'm selfishly like looking for tools that I think would have helped when I was PMing jobs. And so sometimes that leads us astray because it's not necessarily the best thing for the field or for what's happening today. And so like with Ben's help and the rest of the team here, we're trying to really say, okay, Tom mentioned we're Procore shop. It's gotta somehow be related to or integrate with Procore, because that's like the meat and potatoes of everything we do. And then it really better eliminate some part of the field and the office's job if we're going to add something new in. And when I say eliminate, like take away an Excel process or take away a paper process, it's got to be then easy on top of that, because there's so many demands in the field that like you will burn people out if you just throw them app after app after app. So we really try to like weed them out before they get to the field. And Tom, being our resident field tech adopter, helps us with a lot of that too. So he's a huge asset when it comes to that.
Yeah, maybe touch on that, Tom, too, because like, how do you kind of self-filter some of these things? I mean, I know your relationship with Ben is pretty strong, of you guys probably working in tandem of recommendations he has, and maybe curious like how you find things outside of a VDC or a tech person's role. Like how do new tools come across your radar? Are they at conferences? Are they just your own self-research? Like how do you find things that you think could like truly eliminate some processes or challenges that you have?
Yeah, I think before I really met Ben and understood, what he was doing and what his role was, it was definitely self-research. I would think to myself, hey, this is what I want to do with my iPad. I'm sure there's been another person out there who's also thought this and probably come up with something. That's actually, when I was in San Francisco, that's actually how I stumbled across PlanGrid. And I actually met up with a few of those guys, and we would kind of talk through some troubleshooting and stuff with that. So I was kind of on my own for a while out there. So I was definitely looking for things to make my job a little bit easier. But since moving back and having the support of Ben and Clay, Ben's been great. And I think the way Skender handles filtering through new technology is great. We have, a small group of us meet. We kind of discuss, is this going to make, because Clay's 100% right. You keep just shoving stuff out there, people are going to get burned out. They're going to stop using it. But I think Skender is very methodical. They think through what they really want to roll out, what role it is going to play. And then, like Clay said, what is it going to eliminate? What is it going to take off? And Ben, when I spoke a little bit earlier about using the technology that we have today, Ben's been great about coming out to the new project that I'm on now and explaining CM Builder. We've been using that for a while now, and I didn't know about it. And he was telling me how we were using it to win pitches. And, I saw it as more of a logistics tool. So now every time we have a big change on the project, I go in CM Builder, I show what it's going to look like, and I'm able to show the client, I'm able to show the architect, I'm able to show all the tradesmen, like this is what the site's going to look like for the next 4 weeks to scale and make it be realistic instead of just, a Bluebeam markup or my own crayon drawing, trying to explain this stuff to these guys. And then he's brought up a few other, things that would drone deploy. Well, we just recently got a thermal drone, And he was talking to me about that and how he was using it in another project. And, you know, the project we're working on is a passive house. And I'm like, bring that thing out here. When we do our full building blower door, we'll be able to see the entire roof and facade and where I'm leaking air. And it's been very cool and fun to kind of play off of each other. He'll bring up things, I'll bring up ideas, and he'll kind of try and back into it. But everything's been super beneficial. And I think, you know, I try to push it as much as I can with the other supers, sometimes successful, sometimes not. But yeah, I think the way we handle things like that it's a great methodology, and I think it really makes things efficient and useful for everybody.
Yeah, well said. I think it's so encouraging to like see relationships like yours and Ben, where like obviously more office focused, kind of broader view and perspective, but then also rooted in a field focus and what it is that you're doing and kind of a filter. Like, man, for the folks that are listening who kind of are in like Ben's role, I think you said it well, like come out of the field, like ask, engage, like hear those questions, ask those questions of like what it is that you're being challenged by. You said something that I wanted to touch on because this is currently, Adam and I have a lot of fun hot takes with each other. We get into some pretty good, I would say, discussions. Maybe that's the kind way of putting it. You mentioned, hey, like having it start on an iPad, of like, hey, there's got to be an app or an iPad for that. The ongoing kind of debate that Adam and I have is like, hey, do you feel like superintendents are really going to continue to be assigned like full on computers? I guess maybe this is a little bit to you, Clay, of like kind of the difference between, hey, if there's really not a iPad interfaced type of tool, or if a tool doesn't have that type of interface on a mobile device like an iPad, it's really challenging to get that field buy-in. I'm not going to maybe say what Adam and I's like preferences are or kind of our opinions, but like to your point of, hey, starting at like an iPad level, is that like a big filter for you, or what you've kind of seen as some of these tools that have come out of like, hey, if it's not easy to use at that level, it probably won't get as much traction as it could?
I mean, I think it's got any piece of tech that we're going to try to adopt's got to have a very usable mobile version, let's say. But I don't see us saying, okay, field's going all iPad or all laptop or all any one thing. I think if Tom thinks iPad's the way to go, he's going to have an iPad. Like, we don't want to limit if what they're using, but because IT or whoever thinks that's the best option. We want them to have the best option to do their job the way they think they're going to be the most successful. And since some like the iPad and some like the laptop, the tools have to do both.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, whatever the solution is, right, it's just got to provide value on whatever format, whatever platform, right? It's got to be useful. It's got to be a value add to the construction process.
Yep. Or it'll never get used, and then there will be a dramatic failure.
Yeah. I think when we're maybe, go for it, Adam. I had a follow up, but I've been taking your airtime.
You're good, man. You're good. Just a question for Tom, kind of going back on the, discovering technology, discovering what's available. I've had a lot of conversations lately with different superintendents around the country, and one thing that continues to come up is that a lot of the field staff, whether superintendent, PM, PE, generally job site individuals, it's not always obvious what the sort of the art of the possible is using what tools are out there today. Like, you guys in the field aren't spending the majority of your day doing research and trying to find those tools. So I'm curious, in your day-to-day decision-making, problem-solving processes as a superintendent, at what point does a trigger go off to say, I wonder if there is a tech or if there is a solution that will help me solve this problem? Is that relatively common in your mind, or is that more of when you get something from Clay or Ben that you run with it?
It's definitely something that's always in the back of my mind. I mean, I think one thing that really draws me to this industry and what we do is problem solving, right? Like, that is what we do. And if there weren't problems to solve, we wouldn't have jobs. And I think in doing that and constantly seeing a new issue or a new problem every day, you start to see some commonalities between those, and you start to think, okay, if this is an issue and it's a continuing issue, there has to be some kind of solution out there for this issue. So yeah, I'm constantly thinking of it in those terms. You know, you'll have those one-offs where obviously I don't think there's going to be a tech solution to this issue, but for example, with drone deploy, I got a field report saying that we missed our cleanouts for all of our underground plumbing. And of course the field report came 2 months after we poured our slab, and I went out there and I couldn't find it. And then I remember that Ben had been, flying every week. So I was able to go back and I was able to find where those cleanouts were to the inch using drone deploy. So it's taking an issue that I've had in the past. I've been there before, and it's taken me 4 hours to take dimensions off of a column line based on the shop drawing, take a hammer and slowly tap away until I find it, where I was able to do this in literally 15 minutes. So it's seeing those common problems and always thinking, okay, there's got to be a solution to this that someone's already thought of.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
Clay, I'm curious too, as you kind of mentioned this earlier of like, hey, it has to be plugged into our bigger kind of tools and platforms and initiatives. One thing we've talked about on previous seasons is kind of like, let's call it the digital documentation of Bluebeam was kind of this first wave, call it 10-ish years ago, right? Like, hey, we're moving into the PDF world. Bluebeam seems to be a really helpful tool to help us go into that world. And then it was kind of the second wave of, call it Procore or Autodesk, basically these PM tools, right? They're coming up out of these ranks, and that kind of has been the second wave of, all right, how do we now digitize kind of the world of just communication of all the things that happen at a job level? Do you sense that like reality capture is kind of becoming this next wave of, there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of solutions that can kind of do that, but just this idea of like digitizing what you guys are building as you're building it, we categorize that and call it reality capture, but do you see that maybe necessarily being as big as those other two? Do you have like another category that you've seen? Yeah, just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I personally think it's going to get to that point. In construction, I think everything is pretty slow to adopt when it comes to that next step. We're using it on every job, right? Construction site to capture our job sites. But our teams aren't using video walks on every single job, and there might be taking 6 360 photos. And so we need to we got to get over that hurdle, show them the value add of everything that the tools bring to the table with the video walks. And I think they'll just be these little bars you got to get over to push it to that next level. And I think we're close to that next level. I think the all the talk of AI, which I didn't want to bring up, but that's gonna drive some of that as well. We're not big enough to really do a whole lot with all that data yet, but we want to continue to capture it so that as the time comes, we've got something there that we can use. So I personally think it's gonna take that next step in the future.
Yeah,
I'm gonna put you on the spot, Clay, and find out why you didn't want to bring up AI. I'm curious.
No, I just joke about how everywhere you go, it's like every other word, and I try not to say it as often as you see the meme on Instagram where the guy's doing a 10-minute pitch and says AI 39 times. So
it's a great video.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it obviously has gotten mainstream. Like it definitely feels like the one category that has a lot of impact on our personal lives in addition to our like professional lives, which I don't know if that's what's made it seem so like coming from both angles in a way, but yeah, hey, we can talk about it. It may even be the theme of next season, which Adam and I have yet to kind of land on yet, but that would just be opening up Pandora's box. But Tom, I guess I'm maybe curious to like kick it to your spot, like when to kind of the adoption piece and maybe these waves of sorts that we're talking about, like what in your eyes have you seen that has just like totally changed adoption and kind of the mindset towards technology? Like you mentioned a little bit earlier about just the challenge of like, hey, getting other people to kind of see and believe what it is that is being helpful. Like, are there stories or things that you've kind of can go back and point to of like, man, when this happened, adoption just like really started to skyrocket or just have a different mindset around?
Yeah, I think for that, especially on the field side, you kind of have to know your audience. I think right now I'm probably one of the first waves of college educated like superintendents. I think a lot of guys before me came up through the trade, and everyone after me is more on the college leaning side. So I'm kind of right in the middle right now, and I think it's knowing who you're addressing. I think it's knowing kind of what they're used to doing. And I mean, let's be honest, no one really likes change. Everyone has their way of doing something, and everyone's going to continue to do that until proven otherwise. So I think the best way for the adoption is to do it yourself. Practice what you're preaching and show that it works. And I have my way of doing things. Like we've talked about, I really enjoy technology. I love trying new things. And as soon as something clicks for me, I'm going to push it to everyone that I know. And we have a very tight knit group, especially on our multifamily team with these superintendents. And when we meet or when our boss is talking to us, like, oh, we're having an issue over here with whatever it may be, I'm able to pull on my experience and say, this worked really well for me. We're using an MLID, I think it's called, and Ben had actually purchased that to help get a more accurate scale on the drone for drone deploy. And when he came out and explained that to me and what it was, I go, this would be great to spot check elevations or to GPS underground utilities, because how many times does a surveyor come out, shoot a point, and then 2 days later, the concrete guy knocks the point out, right? So we kind of went through and we test drove that for a little while. And I went and I told, my boss about it. And he emailed me the other day and said that one of our younger superintendents used it to go through and mark out all of his underground utilities. And he was able to drop it on a drawing. So now he always has that information. So I feel as long as you constantly do what you're saying and can show that benefit, I think people are a lot quicker to adopt it than just being forced. Like, hey, this is what you're going to do. This is how it's going to be done. Where Skender kind of lets you develop your own way of it and then kind of pass that along and help out your colleagues.
I chuckle because I feel like we need to get you some affiliate links or putting some links up in the corner here of these other teams which is amazing, because I mean they're great, obviously, right? They're great hardware partners, great software partners that I think are just doing some really great things that really helps broaden the awareness that it's like, hey, there's not just one single tool. Like when we talk about workflows and kind of the holistic approach of trying to improve a process, like I think you said it earlier, like there's no one silver, sword that can just do everything. And so anyway, I love that you're name dropping some other friendlies that we appreciate in the space too, that are doing some great things. And I guess, Clay, like I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that question too. Like, when do you see adoption at maybe kind of the office and ops level of things really starting to take off? Like, totally agree, Tom, with what you're saying of like going and showing them in person is huge, but you have budgets, you have, other kind of folks on leadership teams and executive teams probably asking like, hey, what is this line item? How does this play into the bigger, portion of what we're doing as a company? Like, where do you see that adoption kind of start to inflect and change?
So I'll use Struction Site as an example. Prior to that, our people would take project photos on an iPhone, go back to the office, download them to a folder, drag them onto a PDF, and build a weekly report to go out to their owner team. And that's what they did. It was fine. It was easy, air quote easy. And they got the minimum number of pictures to put out the report. And so on the circuit, we were like, there's something here with the app, and on top of it is the 360 photo, right? And you get so much more information from that one shot. So even if they do only take 6 shots, they're still getting, let's call it 6 more than 6. So they've got a little bit more coverage of their job with 360 camera. And so we piloted it and felt like there was enough groundswell to go enterprise, and now it's well, how are people do it if they don't have their 360 camera? I don't think we would hear the end of it on them being able to do their weekly report. So I just think it's got to be the right tool and it's got to be rolled out correctly, but it has to save people time, and someone has to everyone needs to see a reason why it makes their job a little easier. I think that's probably the biggest thing to really have it hit that next level.
Yeah. And
Bro, really quick, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to jump on the construction site thing for a minute. I have kind of a cool story. So was doing a project in one of the northern suburbs. I started in February of 2020. So, and obviously COVID and all the lockdowns, and the city actually stopped doing inspections. And so we were on a really tight deadline, of course. Construction didn't stop, right? We still had to keep moving. So I reached out to the city inspector, and I told him that we had been using this construction site with 360-degree photographs, and I could get him onto the webpage so he could click and do his inspection. And he's like, well, let me see what it looks like. Let me see how the clarity is. And we sent it in, and he actually would sign off every week. I had an above ceiling inspection, and I would use those 360 photos. And that's how I got him to sign off, so we could keep moving on that project.
That's awesome.
Huge. It was great.
I hate to even, maybe you can give us a range, like how old was maybe that inspector that was maybe not as excited to learn a new tool or a new process?
He was probably in his early 50s.
Okay. Yeah. Then, but it's interesting too, like we've talked about COVID, in different seasons and episodes and conversations before, but it really is fascinating how much that like really helped accelerate kind of just this idea and concept of like, wait, I can be there without physically being there. A lot of the questions of quality and coverage and all the things that get answered really quickly. Yeah. So you actually stole one of the questions I was going to ask you. It was just a story or something that, popped up that comes to mind. And so no, it's good to hear that that also plays out too. Adam, you got, I have a few more in my hopper, but I know you got a couple more on your end.
Yeah. No, just to tag onto that too. It's cool to hear that story and then sort of plug sort of some of our internal narrative around giving people superpowers, right? That ability to be in two places at once or travel back in time, or, like just equating the ability to do things that we didn't have options to do before. So awesome story, Tom. We also have a fun kind of popular question that we like to ask a lot of customers as well. And so far we've been talking majority of the time in sort of current processes and even the evolution of tech in the past. From, maybe both of your perspectives, Tom first and then Clay, if you had the magic wand, if you could look at the industry as it sits today and identify an area or a use case or a problem set that you're experiencing, regularly, repetitively, whatever it might be, and you would hope that the construction tech industry would apply some effort to that, what kind of pops into your mind, or where could the industry as a whole go next?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to bring back Nextels. I think that was, I think the industry went back like decades when they got rid of those.
I do want to say some people probably don't know what Nextels are, Tom. So you gotta qualify what that is.
It was a mobile radio, like a walkie-talkie that you could call anyone at any time, and it made for some very interesting moments on public transportation if you were running a little late.
That's awesome.
Man, that is awesome. I can't remember the last time I heard Nextel, but that's great. Anyway, keep going.
Can you maybe rephrase that a little bit? I'm not 100% sure what you were asking.
Well, let me
Sure,
go.
yeah.
So I think this isn't exactly what you wanted, but if I could wave a wand every time and skip an implementation phase and just go from R&D and like this tool is awesome to 2 years later, everyone's using it and loving it, that would be perfect. But I know that wasn't your question. I think that just being able to continue to make it easier to tie all our point solutions together to garner more useful like insights into your projects. not every tool is good at everything, and there are still a lot of individual tools that we like and we're trying to use, but you still have to spend a lot of time putting similar things in multiple places and trying to pull that all together. And it might be because of our size, we just don't have the infrastructure to integrate them all yet. But I see it happening at the conferences. Ways to start making things talk a little bit easier to each other. But like, that's the magic wand. If someone could do that and make it so you don't have to have 10 in-house developers, I think that's going to be huge for this industry.
Surprise of an answer. Would not have thought that, especially from the implementation phase. It's oftentimes where some awesome workflows and tools don't make it through, which is really sad to see. But yeah, Tom, the question really is just like, hey, magic wand, like where do you want to wave the wand to just fix something that is just really, really painful right now?
I think the magic wand for me would be trying to show an owner, and I think there are some tools out there right now that are kind of going toward this, but what the end product looks like. I think as a superintendent, and this was one of the biggest frustrations I had doing the car dealerships, is you would look at something in 2D on a drawing with the owner, and they're like, yeah, that sounds good. This is what I want. And then as you start to build it, they're like, what is this? I didn't ask for this. Like, yeah, you did about 2 months ago. But having some way to show what that end product looks like, and having them be able to actually understand what they are getting at the end of the day, I think that would make my job and superintendent's jobs just in general a lot easier.
Yeah, that was brought up, episode 1 this season. The same question, and just the idea of what the 3D coordination component of a lot of software is really bringing, and obviously how it's helping the field to do clash and coordination and all those things. But just even from like a visualization standpoint of like, all right, owner, this is let's go through your space. Let's just visualize these key areas, that what's exposed, what's not, what this looks like, what's not. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you kind of reiterate what was kind of shared earlier this year. Totally different conversation.
Yeah, I think the context of that previous sort of similar answer was around educating the younger staff coming up. And Tom, you alluded to kind of where you fit in the generations of coming out of college, going into superintending. How do you guys at Skender handle the new generations coming into these field roles that maybe have not yet experienced a ton of field time? And Tom, what does mentoring at Skender look like of the younger generation for you?
We practice a lot of humility, be humble. And I worked for a pretty sizable general contractor before Skender, and it was definitely, getting tossed into the fire, sink or swim. And there were definitely some times that I walked away from some conversations with some foremen with my tail between my legs, being educated very quickly. And I definitely try to pass that along. And I think all of our superintendents, I will say that the mentoring and how we handle new hires is second to none at Skender. I think we do an incredible job with it. But the biggest thing we try to instill is it's a team. Be humble, listen. These guys have been doing this for a long time. They have valuable input. And you may have seen a scenario like this in a textbook or in a problem or in a project, but I promise you that it's not going to play out that way in the field in real life. And I think that Skender does a very good job of bringing in the right people, trying to find the right culture fit. And I think that makes our job as senior leaders a lot easier to really pass along that knowledge and to bring up the right, that next generation.
That's great.
Well said. Well, fellas, we're coming up on time. One question I kind of like to end and just land the plane a little bit with is just like, what would you say to encourage someone kind of in your role? So Clay, maybe I'll start with you, just at a kind of senior ops level, more kind of, above the trees, looking out there into all the different things that's going on. Like what would you want to say to someone that's in your role, that's maybe considering some of these tools, maybe stuck in some kind of challenges that may be? Like, how would you encourage someone that maybe is in a similar role that you are?
I think you have to try very hard to not have the blinders on and try to pick solutions that you think are the right solutions just because you or I think they're right. Like, I got to involve more than myself. I might be out there, like, seeing what's on the conference circuit and what tools are available, but don't just get solely focused on one tool because you think it works really awesome. I got to stay humble, like Tom said, and involve everyone in the company that can help guide us to that right direction. Because I've made mistakes on things that I thought were going to be perfect game changers that never made it past R&D phase.
Well said. Tom, any thoughts to that? Would encourage maybe someone, I maybe extend it a little bit farther, someone in your role of your kind of seniority, and then maybe someone who's just coming into kind of the industry that is also coming into a field role?
I think just be open. I mean, I think with what we do as superintendents, you got to create that team environment. It's not one person that gets you through any of these projects. It's an entire team. And, from the first year apprentice to the guy that's been there for 35 years, they all have a role to play, and they all have something valuable to contribute. And I think just being open and listening, you could always say no, but at least, you gave them the opportunity to have their input, but be open, listen. And, I think that's the biggest thing, just be open to what other people have to say, and make sure you listen, you follow through with it.
I'm going to take one out of your page. Maybe keep being curious. I feel like that's, as I've gotten to know you and your story of just how you kind of got into what you're in now, it's like just curiosity alone is just interesting, because you can play off of it, you can explore it, or you can move on from it. And I think not being curious definitely puts up some roadblocks and barriers that you may not get past if not. So Adam, any kind of last thoughts as we wrap up, and anything that you were dying to ask that I interrupted and talked about Canada about?
No. I think as long as we straighten out your understanding of where Ontario, the different Ontario,
I got it.
Okay. No, man, just Tom and Clay, awesome conversation. Again, great to hear perspective differences from, various companies, various positions. A lot of what we're doing this podcast for is to help educate the rest of the industry, and, anyone else who is, Tom, to your point, open to understanding different ways of doing things and taking on tools and practices that others have found to be valuable. So appreciate all your time and insights for sure.
Yeah. And I think just to encourage you guys to, like, always, any conversation we've had with Skender, obviously outside of the two of you and Ben and just a few other folks, like, world-class people. Obviously you guys are doing some great stuff. It's really encouraging to get to hear your stories and share them across a ton of different folks. And yeah, it's fun in a position that we get to highlight and share what you guys are doing and what's successful and continuing to be humble. All those things. It's neat to be able to have a platform to do that with, and we just appreciate you guys. Appreciate you hopping on and we're literally recording this in the middle of the day, which on a Monday too. So if there's a busier time in both of your schedules, I know that's probably a time like now. So any other thoughts that you guys want to share before we kind of wrap up?
No, we just appreciate the partnership with Drone Deploy Instruction side. It's been really positive for us. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was a good time.
We got a lot of people that represent outside of just Adam and myself that actually make it happen. We just get to have some fun conversations on this end. So, but appreciate your guys' time, all the feedback, all the stories, and great things too. And we will catch you on another episode. Appreciate you guys making the time in, and we will talk soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Make sure to subscribe to Built Different on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Let's build this community together.